The Bible Institute movement. How was it possible for Satan to reduce the church, whose very foundation was once the truth Jesus Christ taught the apostles, to the rubble of conflicting notions it is today? Actually, it was not all that difficult. All he had to do was suggest a few innovative doctrines to specifically selected individuals who had no knowledge of or regard for church history and traditional Christian doctrines. He could then use the beliefs he crafted through these people to turn the church in some new direction. That's all he did with Darby and his dippy doctrines. To attain the measure of success he has enjoyed over the past 2 centuries, however, Satan knew he needed to foist his deception off on more than just a few people. He needed lots of folks who either did not know or did not care what the traditional beliefs of Christianity had been. Unfortunately, most of the people who believe his lie today fall into both categories. They don't know all that much about church history because the people who teach them, like Darby, have a somewhat contemptuous attitude toward traditional Christianity. Consequently, the people being taught don't see why church history is all that important. However, even that situation is the result of Satan's ingenious plan. Over the past century, Satan has worked to create a mentality in most Christians wherein church authority resides solely in the local congregation. Like dispensationalism, that is a novel concept. It can be traced back through the Plymouth Brethren to the Congregational denomination. Hence, it is no surprise that Satan used D.L. Moody and C.I. Scofield, both Congregational ministers, to push Darby's deception. The result of their efforts has been the rise of the independent local church. However, the independent church movement would not have been possible without another tool that Satan used, the Bible Institute. In this case, however, as in so many others, we find Satan and God using the same tool for completely different purposes. By the end of the 19th century, Satan had already instilled in many evangelical Protestants a deep-seated distrust of the doctrines taught in the theological seminaries of the mainline denominations. They had good reason to feel the way they did. Darwin's theory of evolution had long since contributed to the goofy belief that the scriptures contain myth, saga, and legend. While evangelicals watched in absolute amazement, their seminaries succumbed to the new liberal idiocy one by one. Under such circumstances, it didn't take much for Satan to convince many, especially those involved in evangelistic outreach, that the best course of action was to take the gospel message and cut loose from the traditional theological schools. But an additional argument he used to convince many is obvious. No denominational seminary in the United States at that time taught the premillennial doctrines of the early church fathers, much less the goofy dispensational premillennialism of John Darby and the Plymouth Brethren. They were either teaching Augustine's amillennialism or the ridiculous postmillennialism that originated with Daniel Whitby from 1638 to 1726. By fostering multifaceted theological disputes, Satan was able to discredit the message coming out of the seminaries in the minds of many who still believed the gospel. But his specific focus was those conservative theological schools that still had a respect for traditional Christianity. By lowering the esteem long accorded a theological education, Satan was able to bolster the image of dispensational schools which had little or no regard for traditional Christian beliefs. Please understand, without the safe haven provided by Bible institutes, Bible conferences, and the Holiness Camp Meeting movement, the vitality of the gospel message might well have gotten lost in all the theological fuss that Satan kicked up. Therefore, all these new institutions played just as key a role in God's plan as they did in Satan's. The fact that God uses something, however, does not mean he places his unconditional seal of approval on it. As the saying goes, Balaam was not the last person to hear God's message spoken by a jackass. God will most often use whatever moron is available. I should know. But enough sarcasm. With new converts coming into the church from revival meetings, the need for some kind of theological training for prospective leaders soon became obvious. That's when the idea arose that a 1-year or 2-year course of study at a Bible institute could replace a traditional 7-year college and seminary education. Consequently, evangelists and prominent ministers began to establish Bible institutes outside the mainline denominations. This has, in large part, resulted in the dumbing down of Christians in regard to the history of the church. That in turn has allowed Satan to introduce all sorts of ridiculous new doctrines without anyone asking whether they have ever existed before. The evangelist A.B. Simpson opened the first Bible Institute, Nyack Missionary College, in 1882. As the name implies, its purpose was to prepare individuals for missionary service around the world. From equally humble beginnings, many Bible institutes have since gone on to become 4-year liberal arts colleges, but it should be obvious that their original purpose was not to offer a well-rounded Christian education. It was to allow an opportunity for a few men to transfer their understanding of the Scriptures to several young people who were preparing for the ministry. One unique characteristic of the Bible Institute movement is the fact that it combined the gospel message preached by conservative evangelists with the dispensational doctrines of the Plymouth Brethren. While doctrinal teaching regarding God, man, Christ, sin and salvation, and the church varied from institution to institution, the overwhelming majority of the Bible institutes, in existence by 1950, taught a dispensational understanding of the Second Coming. That is why the students at all these new Bible institutes used a variety of theological textbooks, but after 1909, the majority most likely used only one study Bible, the Scofield Reference Bible. Is it any wonder, then, that in the minds of a vast multitude of evangelical Christians today, the gospel is inextricably linked to a dispensational view of the return of Jesus Christ?